Hey guys, it's 9:31. You guys want to get started?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's totally fine.
fantastic. Did you guys all get the instructions? Do y'all have them handy?
Yeah, I have them ready for the introduction questions and everything like that whenever you're ready to go.
Go ahead. Anybody can jump in at any time. I'm certainly not the moderator. I don't think we have one, so whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
I guess I'll start off. Hello everyone. My name is Shauna Black. I am a senior here at VCU. It's my last semester. I graduated May. Yay. And I'm a poli-sci major.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Ariana. I'm a junior here at BCU, and I'm a poli-sci major as well.
My name is Javon. I'm a senior poli science major.
Um, oh, I'm Danae. I'm a junior and I'm a poli-sci major. Is that all of us?
Me. So I'm Ricky. I'm an economics major. It's my senior year last semester. So yeah, I'm with you, Shanna. I can't wait to get out. Can't wait to get out. All right, so we've got some discussion questions. Who wants to get started? Anybody want to volunteer to go first?
I think,
We can,
oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
the icebreaker questions. Oh, hold on. I'm like I can't see. So what did you find most surprising or interesting so far this semester in this course, I'm assuming? Um, I guess I don't know if that makes me a little dumb, but I really did not know about any of like DC's voting laws. Like like not like DC not having voting rights and stuff like that. Like I think it was the podcast. That module was like kind of really interesting to me because I didn't know nothing about DC statehood at all. So yeah, that was most interesting to me.
I think what was most interesting for me, at least, or like the most like surprising, was when we had to read up on like all these different like court cases. I just thought the like reading about each like impact of them and like what exactly it did and like how it contributes to like our voting history and stuff was really cool. And because I usually just like had no clue about that, but I thought that was really cool.
And I would say the DC statehood. I didn't know like how like voting goes in DC, so it's pretty interesting to me to know.
I'll jump in from this one. Not to like hop on the train, but it's also the DC podcast for me. But it's mainly just because I'm a DC native. And even living in DC, I didn't even know the history when it comes to like local autonomy within in general. And the lack of control of security that we even had is so evident with like federal force. But once again, I was a child like then, but now as an adult, it's just I was just unaware of everything that was going on.
Yeah, I'll say you guys are not alone with not understanding DC because you just don't expect it, right? One of the things that was less surprising for me, but a good reminder is how the bar keeps moving, right? How that every time a different group raises their hand and says, "Hey, may I vote or have any type of individualism or autonomy?" There's a different reason put forward for why they can't. So it is surprising that DC can't vote because it seems like it shouldn't fit if all the other states can, except that DC owns the government, or it's where the government's housed, right? So some people think it's a state and some people don't. That's what we learned from the reading. Anybody want to go first with how'd you feel about working through some of the content or the class broadly?
I can go. Um, at first I was kind of nervous. Well, it was nervous looking at kind of like the workload just because like I kind of just didn't expect I didn't know what to expect from this class, especially it being online. And I feel like it's kind of a rigorous course to be an online class because usually some classes I take are really like lackluster when it comes to like content. So working through it, I feel real kind of informed And I feel as though these are things that we see currently now, literally in the forefront of us as of right now. So everything just feels so relatable now. It's just interesting. So I was nervous, but now I'm feeling more comfortable.
Oh, I'll go. I would say at first I didn't know what to expect. I think the whole thing, like the whole class was like interesting, like how they format their work and stuff. Because I'm a full-time worker, full-time student, so things can be really hard at times. There was a couple of times I wasn't sure like how to like label my work, like the questions. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how to reach out if I have any questions, concerns about anything. So I'm still learning that now. Um, but yeah, I think things got better along as I continue to do my work and stuff like that. But like everything we'll be going over has like I see it now in the news, like some of the laws and stuff and the current events going on now. So I think this is like pretty cool. Also, if you guys didn't go to the panel earlier this week, did y'all go to the panel, like the Trump 2.0 panel on Thursday?
No, how was that?
It was really good. It was really good. I left 10 minutes earlier. They just talk about like the Trump administration, um, and current events that's going on. Elon Musk, checks and balances, and in international relations and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool.
I'll piggyback off of what you're saying. The tail end of that, it's cool to take the material that we're learning and apply it to what
Yeah.
we're doing, because sure, we all took some version of like civics or government
Hmm.
in, middle school and high school, but you forget all of that. And what this reading has kind of reminded me is that the various levels of government sometimes jockey for position, right? Is it the
Yeah.
executive branch? Is it the courts? And we saw that a lot in the States. We saw that a lot in almost every unit.
I think one thing that like really stood out to me about like the way that this course was structured is that it's the first time in a while that I've been in a course where I've received feedback, like actual feedback based on the work that I do. And I think that took me like it scared me a little bit at first because like going into the prep work portfolios, I was like, whoa, like I've never had to take notes before, which were not
Mhm.
necessarily like graded for accuracy, but just like the way that it was structured and the way that like it honestly helped like install habits when it came to like in text citations and stuff like that, which I'm really thankful for. I mean, the material beside, just like the way that honestly it was structured was really cool.
Yeah, and kind of like all of it together because thinking back to like the first week where you like had to watch the intro videos and then like she was like if you think this is too much for you, you got to drop the course. And I had the drop day, so I was like I'm a little screwed, like I gotta push through like regardless.
Yeah.
But even though it was like at that point it was very intimidating, I do like what you said about the notes. It kind of forces you to actually learn the material about doing the prep work, because usually in an online course it's not very structured. It's just like three quizzes and you call it a day. So you could do it a little unethically, but with the notes, it's like you actually have to take your time and like read the material, even if you're not really. And obviously, if you read something and you type, you're going to process it unknowingly. Because also, that's what thinking about current events in the current election. I've had to I've gotten a little bit of debates about stuff with people, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize I actually like learned this, and I'm like, oh, I did learn that from the work I done in this class. So I think that was kind of, wait, what was even the question? Yeah, so I think that like the content of the class is not as intimidating as that first day, because the first day I was like, oof, I don't know what to expect, but we're good now.
I feel better. That's fantastic. Um, all right, everybody. So we've got some required questions. Who wants to take a stab at the first one about history repeating itself?
I guess I can go first.
Sure.
I think when it comes to like voting history, I believe that history shows like after time that voting rights are almost like never guaranteed in a way. But they also must be like actively protected, right? I believe like an example of this would be in like the Shelby County versus Holder case. And that kind of demonstrated how removing federal like oversight led to restrictive laws like, you know, like strict voter ID requirements and like a polling place closure. Um, but just like in general, I feel like the more that like voting, I feel like voting rights in itself can just be so easily like impacted.
That's a great answer. I'll build on that if you don't mind. So your example of Shelby versus Holder is perfect, right? So we started out with this country saying only white male property owners can vote, and then as we like expand it west, other white men could vote. But then as different groups started to raise their hand and say, "I'd like to vote as well," we realized that having the states always make up the laws is probably not the best thing. And that's what you're describing, right? Like where you put power back in the states' hands, you're going to get a mix of mishigosh across different states. Like this state will say, sure, women can vote, and this state will say, no, they can't. And that's why we have amendments. And when you go through cases that look to exploit those amendments or reverse those amendments, that becomes the problem. That's one of the problems I think we see. And then the other problems I think we see that was really highlighted well in the last unit is that the law can't be written black and white, right? It can have one meaning and one court can interpret it one way and then another court can interpret it another way. And then lastly, different iterations of a court can interpret and reinterpret and even start to make up as what the last unit challenged the way that they're seeing the law. So you have an amendment written for, all Black men to be able to vote. And then somebody interprets that differently. I'll kind of pause there. Sorry. Babbling a little bit.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump in, Ricky, after you, because every time I talk to you, you always make good points, so I just have to jump in. When you talked about the Shelby and Holder, right? Only thing I really think about was that those pre-clearance check, and it makes me think about how these processes are not linear or permanent, right? And we see that in today's world, even when landmarks and legislation such as like the Voting Rights Act, protections can be dismantled. Right. And then even then it also makes me think about political self-interest over drive change, right, that we talked about within the reading. Specifically within the first unit of I'm pretty sure it was Race and Civil War. Within that reading, its support for expanding or like restricting voters' rights, that it kind of like frequently like stems from election strategies rather than democratic practices, right? And both parties shift positions as we've seen. That goes into the voter medium. I'm yapping. I'm almost there, guys. How we see the right going more right and the left becoming more right just to fit those requirements, right? And lastly, the taking form of everything, right? So exclusive voting, adapting their tactics, moving from discrimination from that race neutral standpoint that they use within the reading, which is also included within Unit 1. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop yapping. Someone can go next. I was about to go on a tangent.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Finish? Okay, I would say it does, but I just feel like it's more modern. If you look at today's Trump is like revoting the Biden administration will come to voting by expanding voting registration. And you can look at, I think it's Unit 1 or Unit 2 when they talk about like discrimination with voting with different amendments. That's pretty much it, I would say.
Danae, you have anything to add? Hopefully I'm saying your name correctly.
You are. I just suck at Zoom, so never can find the buttons. But I can't remember. I've been trying to find the court case, but I think it was in the last unit where I think it was in Arizona, and they were trying to change. Trying to remember this correctly. They were trying to change like the voting laws there or something in Arizona, and the court kind of made it worse. I'm trying to find it, Hillary. Oh, they changed Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That was it. And he changed it and he interpreted it differently. The
Roberts Court? Is that what you're talking about? Where the Roberts Court took like a very narrow stance.
I found it. When Justice Altia came
Alito.
of
Yeah.
the Second Voting Rights Act, making 5 guideposts, that was like, I don't know, that was just too shocking to me, because I was like, that's where I think the lesson of like learning from history really can be shown.
Yeah.
Because it's like, where are we going from that? What are we learning from that? Like, why are we always get like 10 steps ahead, but depending on the administration and the Supreme Court, we take 10 steps back. So even though, sorry, I got it together when I found it, but even though, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but even like there will be laws in place, like all the amendments we put into place, and then like the court can be like, well, we interpret this differently than how it's written. So then it's just like you take 5 steps back. And I think that's also why that's like the whole point of the unit. I honestly didn't know that there wasn't no strict voting right written into our Constitution. So I don't know. I hope that we can use all of these court cases to one day be like, oh, this is why we should protect voting rights. But with the current situation in America, I don't think that's coming anytime soon. But maybe I'm wrong. I'll be more positive.
I think that's perfect. That leads us right into the second question about whether or not you guys believe descriptive or substantive representation is more important in a representative democracy. What do you guys think?
I can try to take a hit at this one.
You're gonna
Well,
do fine. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
You're gonna be fine. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Honestly, with both forms, I feel like they're both valuable, but I feel as though substantive representation appears more fundamental when it comes to a democratic government. So, through my point of view, when I think about descriptive representation, it has a lot of important benefits, such as like ensuring diverse voices, right? And experiences from information policy discussions and things of that sort, right? And increasing the political efficiency among marginalized groups, such as me and everyone else in this call, right? Minorities, would you say? It doesn't, but the thing about that is it doesn't like guarantee like alignments, right? I know exactly when it was talking about in unit 3, I believe it was in the first reading, or the first like listen or whatever, when it talked about, is the United States of America a republic or democracy? Uh it talked about a little bit of like that alignment within like the United States, right? And it also mentioned people like Hillary Clinton and various Catholic politicians like sharing the demographic of characteristics that doesn't ensure shared policies or like values, unfortunately. But ultimately, what matters whether representation advances policies to serve their intentions and preferences, right? So high policy opinion leads to greater political satisfaction with governance. So while descriptive representation, to sum it up, while descriptive representation can help better substantive outcomes, I feel like the core purpose of a representative democracy is to enact policies that reflect and will be in the interest of the people. I'm gonna start right here.
Picking off where Shauna just left off, although I believe that representative democracy, I think it's just more like important for substantive representation to make like a breakthrough, because it actually ensures that like the elected officials genuinely advocate for like their policies that benefit their constituents. Although I can acknowledge that like descriptive representation can help communities feel more seen, I do believe that like true representation is about like enacting meaningful change. An example of this could be like in the Citizens United versus the FEC case, where it like allowed basically like all like unlimited corporal political spending, which shows how money can like drown out the voices of everyday citizens to serve their constituents' real needs, which is why I think like substantive representation is very, very important.
I'll go ahead. I agree with both of you. I'm sorry, Javon. I didn't mean to cut you.
Go ahead, go ahead.
You can go. Go
You
ahead.
go ahead. You go ahead, ladies first.
I agree with both of you. I think the challenge with kind of descriptive based politics or representation is that the bar can keep moving and we can keep dividing, right? And we saw that build over all of the chapters. So first, just white men with property. That's a description. Oh no, now white men. Okay, that's a description. Okay, all men, but specifically now Black men. What do you do? And okay, then women have to raise their hand and say, well, what about us? So the 19th Amendment comes along and says, okay, now women can vote. Okay, well, what about specifically Black women? So we keep what abouting it in order to kind of increase the voting population, but the courts and the states and even society at large sometimes says, no, not this specific, very narrow group. And that's why I think subsident makes more sense for the reason that you said is, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong. What's your name, Yana? Is that your name?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I didn't want to mess it up.
you're good.
That's the point that you were making. Like, what's the actual outcome that we're trying to achieve? What's the actual policy? If we focus on that rather than these kind of narrowly focused things, like, okay, well, now 21-year-old votes. Okay, what about 18-year-olds? Like, if we just expand out to all and deal with specific issues, then we'll be better off at, I think, getting everybody included instead of trying to see, how many LGBT people we have in Congress or how many yada, yada, yada. All right, now I'm babbling. Javon,
Oh,
you were
okay. Okay, I would say they both seem pretty helpful, but I'm gonna lean onto substance though because it seems more balanced, and it's like it focuses on the needs and specifics. Like okay, like suppose like something like for African Americans, and they can build something on that. They can focus on more let's say more another topic, more different topics, then pretty much it. I don't want to keep yapping, but that's pretty much it.
fine. How about you, Danae?
Like, I think it was Ricky who said about Congress, which made me think. Um, yeah, I agree. I think both are are important because it does make you feel better when you like look at Congress and it's not just like white men who are like 50 plus. It makes you feel better if you're like, oh, there's a African person, there's an Asian person, there's a Hispanic person. But I do also agree that regardless of race, class, or whatever, Congress should have one goal and it should be for making America better for everyone. Um, and that's with voting rights, any kind of rights. It shouldn't be, because that was also a good point. It shouldn't be marginalized to be like, well, this group should do this and we'll worry about the what if later. It always should just be like, well, these are all Americans, so this is all important. So I think while descriptive representation is good, like when you're looking, it's more important for substantive representation as a whole, if that makes sense at all.
It does. It does make sense. And I think we saw that across kind of all of the units with just the goalpost moving further and further away. Amendment after amendment tries to deal with a specialized group of people down the list, right? Non-property owners, we're still dealing with felons all the way down here and in between, right? Women, Black women, youth, you can't discriminate based on race and then sex and then gender, and still, right, we find ourselves not at all. Okay, the next question is, I've lost behind the Zoom screen. If you had to choose a side, would you say that you're more concerned about passing laws that protect election integrity? And yes, I'm using quotey fingers, or prevent voter suppression? Does anybody have a hard stance?
I personally believe that protecting voter suppression is just more of an urgent concern than passing like additional election integrity laws. While like election security is important, I think many like election integrity laws are used as tools to suppress voter turnouts, particularly like among like marginalized communities. But that's kind of like where I stand on it. I'm willing to like go off of y'all, but that's basically like my blanket stance.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in
Agree,
because I want to
disagree?
second that because I had to get
Okay.
my thoughts together. I will also agree with I will be more concerned about preventing voter suppression, right? I know in Unit 4, they talked a lot about election security, but mainly given an example of like North Carolina and Wisconsin, right? They created like new laws that had eliminated like drop boxes, right? And shortened absent ballot voting windows, what is imposed like strict ID requirements, I believe, after marginalized communities. But ironically, when dealing with that, actual election fraud occurs like within North Carolina, as it like discussed. It was through an legal ballot harvesting scheme by political oppressives, right? But not the type of fraud what these restrictive laws claim to present. They claim to prevent certain ones, but in all actuality, things like the literacy test and everything, right? It was kind of like not too in your face. On paper it looks good, right? But like actually practicing these in order to suppress voter suppression, it actually wasn't really suppressing anything. But it just showed that the restrictions have real impact, right? Wisconsin now ranks, I believe, within the top 5 of hiding a highest state voting costs, while North Carolina saw a drop, I believe, between the 2020 and 24 election, I believe. So trying to trace it back from then versus like now. So my stance would be voter suppression for sure.
Okay. Javon.
Oh, sorry. um, also, I can't remember the unit, but I when we learned about like election integrity, I don't want to say it isn't a problem, but it's not as big as a problem as voter suppression. And like my first thought is oh my god, forgetting the name. Indigenous people. That's what I was trying to say. It's just like that's a number one, they're the original people here, but that's a whole other argument for another day. Like that's a very large group of people who like our country just doesn't think about when it comes to voting. And it's just kind of like saddening to just like read about, because all the stuff they've gone through in like history with America, and now it's like, okay, we're gonna consider you citizens now, but you got to travel. I think it was like one case where they had to drive 5 hours there and 5 hours back to vote. So it's, and then I feel like if we fix voter suppression, it might lead to people saying that there's questions in election integrity, just because when like if a marginalized group actually wasn't voter suppressed, and like they could show up to the polls and make a change, then I would see how like this country would be like it was rigged. But I do think voter suppression is the bigger concern. And even though I just say we shouldn't just like worry about something later, I feel like we should just like worry about election integrity later.
Javon.
Oh yeah, I'll say voting to what was it called? Voting.
Voter
Oh,
suppression,
press
first
on.
election.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I would say like I definitely agree on that. I think it's more important because we can always fix the system. I mean, that's important too, but I think that some of the states, I think it was Unit 3 or 4, where they talk about certain states, like Mississippi, Kansas, are still affected from past legislation laws. Also, Trump trying to revoke Biden administration expansion with the voting registrations in different states. So that's very important. I think we should support trying to like support different states with like voting, expanding voting in different states. Pretty much it.
When we started this question, I used quotey fingers for
Yeah,
election
yeah.
integrity, because we didn't really find any cases, a lot of cases of fraud, right? If you guys remember, fraud's been like a topic from the first unit and more highlighted in the last 2 units as not really being there, right? There are claims of fraud, but I tie those claims back to just the ability to suppress votes of certain people, right? First, it was you don't have property, so you don't care enough about this country in order to vote. then it was literacy tests and poll texts like you don't have enough money to vote, or you're not smart enough to be able to vote, to oh no, you're so young you can't make good decisions, to women we can't allow them to vote, right? They're not smart enough, and even the factions amongst the groups, but we'll get to that later. But I think I feel like election integrity is just a dog whistle, the same way that it was for Jim Crow laws. Like, this is the reason that we have this in place, all the way up to gerrymandering, right? Which we started around, I think, unit 4 or 5, all in an attempt to say, like, don't worry about what the left hand is doing, which is trying to get or keep political power. We've seen that throughout almost all the units, right? The small group of people resist expansion. So they say, well, the system is rigged or the system is broken, and that's why we have to do this. And I love your you bringing up, Danae, the idea that Indians, right, don't have the ability to vote because of XYZ, and we learned all the XYZs in there, or putting in particular, making the voting process just particularly prickly, whether it's by distance or whether it's by, putting in voter ID restrictions or just not keeping accurate data on the back end. I think election integrity it's not a question, it's not a real thing. We haven't found any proof that anybody is monkeying with or attempting to monkey with our election systems or process in any of the units, at least so
Yeah.
far.
And that's kind of the point I was like trying to make. Like that whole unit, I was like, oh, okay. So it's like it was like it's human error. A lot of it's human error,
On
and
either side, yeah.
human error is never gonna stop because we're never gonna stop being people. So it's like for example, I kind of because I made it was funny because my name, the way it's spelled, it always gets messed up. So like I would be a Diane or like Diana. So when I saw like the unit where it was like it would it was saying fraud because if you had the first same 3 letters of your name, then it was like, oh, that person registered twice. That would happen for my name multiple times because it's the same letters in like 5 different names that start with a D. So yeah, it's just like we can't. Election integrity is just like it's human error. That's basically what we find. So there's really nothing you could do because you can't stop humans from being humans. So yeah.
Well, what he did propose that we do is just say all, so that we prevent those errors, right? What you're describing is an error, either on your side or the poll worker side or the actual agencies keeping the data. And I forget the author's name, the amendment that they crafted was basically saying, just give it to everybody so we can avoid all of these errors or all of these attempts to narrowly read an amendment, or at some points, making up laws if you're the Roberts Court and Alito's hanging around.
Yeah, I want to say, building off of what like you said, Ricky, I also think it's like prevalent in, I believe it's like, I think it was like Unit 5, like the de-escalating the voter wars like section of like the portfolio. I think that makes it clear that like fears of voter fraud are often exaggerated and
Yep.
honestly weaponized to like justify restrictive laws that are like disproportionately like burdening certain voters. And also, since voter fraud is like extremely, like as you said, like in quotes, like extremely rare, I believe efforts should be focusing more on like making voting more accessible rather than like imposing unnecessary barriers.
Yep. Agreed. Anybody else have any closing comments on that question? Or are you guys ready to move on?
Just closing because everyone was just like making so many good points. It was kind of like hard to jump in. I'm not trying to like cut anyone off.
Good. I'm
But
fine.
when it talked about like voter suppression versus like election integrity, it made me think of like groups versus just one independent person, right? When I think about integrity, I'm thinking about every individual person doing their piece. But unfortunately, when you're talking about human error and people, some people aren't really, we can't really count on like certain people to like meet those quotas that we need, especially when it comes to like voting, especially have we seen in like the election this year, unfortunately. Also things like voting error, you also make me think about how like mailing ballots, how sometimes they got lost, sometimes we've seen things in news like things got burnt or things of that nature. And I just really feel like we as people can't really count on that in like other people. So when I think about voter suppression, I feel like there's due to like the process of like even making amendments, like proposing, debate, vote, and then ratifying those amendments, right? In order for to overcome those like voter suppressions, right? But last thing I wanted to say, you just made me think about it, and I wanted to get it off my mind before we move on to the next question. But if anybody else wanted to jump in off my piece, feel free to.
I will. I'll say I think what I'm hearing from everybody is we all kind of agree with the Lyndon Johnson version of the Voting Rights Act. Like, hey, this should be for everybody, all citizens. Now, he used all citizens. I think he maybe have meant everybody. Yeah, because now we see, right, fights for non-citizens. Yeah, but I think his intent was to extend voting rights to everyone. Okay. Additional questions. Oh, parts 1 and part 2. Oh, we have more. Oh, so we were supposed to have a lot more discussion, I guess, about the required questions, but that's okay. We're gonna move on.
Yeah, we're missing two people, so I don't know if it's gonna go like the whole time.
All good. Well, no, we're gonna go till 11. It's fine.
Perfect.
Do you favor or oppose statehood for DC? So DC is part 1 of the question, and then the other territories like Guam and the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and why or why not? Anybody want to start with that question?
I can start because
Oh.
when I read it, I like it made me a little heated. But I would definitely say I favor statehood for Washington D.C. and the U.S. territories. It doesn't make sense to me that you're considered a citizen, but you don't have the rights of citizens. Also, I'm assuming when to get statehood for all of those, it would also mean representation in Congress. It kind of, I feel like, is a waste of time to have like, I don't remember exactly what they're called, but like you have a representative, but they can't really vote on nothing, but they're like here as a voice, but their voice doesn't really matter. So, and then there was like, oh, I can't remember this island, but there's a certain place where it's like U.S. veterans and they served and died for this country.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And it's like, okay, so you fought for this country, you died for this country, and you're not a citizen. And then, but you're a citizen, but you can't vote. And then in DC, it's like you pass the Capitol every single day. You can probably you see the hill from your apartment, but you can't vote. So I definitely do think they deserve statehood. And I always think about their license plate that say like taxation without representation, because it's true. You got everything else of American citizen. You get the taxes. You got to pay to be here, but you can't vote in elections. And I know they can vote in D.C. No, I'm sorry. What's the word? What's the word? Oh my gosh. What's the word? What's the word?
They can cast.
Federal. Oh, federal elections, like for presidents. That's what I'm trying to say. I know they can vote in federal elections, but as we've seen, Congress holds the power. I don't think a lot of people know that, but Congress holds the power for everything that happens in this country. The president's our president's kind of doing his own thing at the moment, but Congress mostly has like the power to make change and stuff in this country. So for a big portion of the country's citizens to not have a say in it just doesn't make sense. So that's my take. But
And I'll update my answer. I think you may have been talking about Samoa. I said Guam. I know they have a lot of veterans, but I think when we went through the chapters, it was Samoa. It was the video where their kind of special delegate was saying, hey, we have like the #1 military recruitment place.
yes, I just like remember the dude sitting in the chair, but for the like,
Yeah,
whatever.
it was Samoa where he was like, we can fight and die, but I don't even really have like a real passport. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that was Samoa. I'd update my answer. I apologize.
I completely like agree with you guys what you said about DC. Like I genuinely think it's just unfair, especially for the fact that we have like they pay federal taxes, you know, so it's like they should be able to. But moving on like towards like the US territories bit, like regarding US territories, I believe that like residents should have the opportunity to determine their own political future through like self-determination. So for like an example, like if a majority of citizens support statehood, then like I feel like it should be favored granting it, right? But if they prefer independence or like continued like territorial status, that choice should also be respected. Like Puerto Rico, for example, has held like multiple referendums on this on its status with shifting opinions. So like I think the decision should be amongst the people itself. But yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback. Oh, I'm sorry, was somebody else talking?
Mhm.
Okay, all right, perfect. I also agree with you guys, starting off with the DC like statehood with the lack of full representation in Congress, despite paying federal tax. It's kind of like a democratic like contradiction when it comes to that. So making DC a state would grant like voting representation and having those two senators addressing this issues. But however, point in the Constitution with delegates within DC as a federal district and argue that statehood would give the city disproportionate influence, like they talked about within the 51 statehood listen that we listened to. um, some propose like alternatives, like relocating parts of DC into Maryland or into Virginia in order to grant that, right? But when it comes to like US territories, such as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands, I feel like they also face taxation without full representation, right? Especially when it comes to like the economic side. The video that we watched, I forgot the name of it, with the news narrator talking about the things that was going on in Puerto Rico. And we literally used them for economic purposes. They also have very much cultural identity here and political implications here, right? So I know some people argue for some alternative solutions, such as greater autonomy or revision of territorial statuses when it comes to those places, right? But ultimately, that decision should be prioritized, in my opinion, for democratic representation and the will of the people within those regions. So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the Maryland and DC thing. That's exactly where I was going to go, right? So DC was formed because Maryland gave a part and Virginia gave a part. And we learned that there's a real proposal, or there was on the table, to say Maryland just reabsorb your portion, Virginia just reabsorb your portion, and we're done. That resolves the fear that some people put forth to say, well, DC is going to have undue influence. I don't exactly understand um, how. And for DC and the territories, if you have to follow the laws, if you're governed by the laws, I can't make sense as to why you then don't get to put your voice forward, the same as other groups have done in the past that cause us to get the 14th, 15th, 19th, 23rd, 25th, right, 26th Amendment. Just, it doesn't make sense. And it takes us right back to something that we said earlier about the Voting Rights Act. Just shoot for all, everybody. Stop trying to make these very, narrowly chosen groups of people and extend it to them. Because you know what, even if we get the territories in DC, what's the next group that everybody's kind of forgotten about or not thought about? That's where I land with that question. What do you guys think about non-citizens having the right to vote?
I honestly would support allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections because if you think about it, like they contribute to our community, they pay taxes, they're affected by like our local policies. And also historically, like as we've mentioned and as we discussed in like our like required questions, voting rights have expanded over time, including for groups that were once excluded, such as like African Americans and women. But I know that I can understand that like a lot of non-citizens like may argue that the US has removed barriers to also like vote for marginalized groups in the past and that they could technically do the same for this community. But that's just like my opinion. I can understand why like people believe that it's like a citizenship like fundamental right. But I believe that like if you're part of a community and if you're contributing to it and if you're actually affected by the laws that are being passed and like local policies, then like you should be able to have some sort of say.
I'll say the same thing. I think that if you give a novice an opportunity to vote, I think they can change the whole voting system. And possibly like just look not just local, but like if like the local numbers like improve, maybe like Congress can like take another step forward in the future.
Yeah, because non-citizens, like, it made me think of because I'm also in an immigration class. So there's like in what am I trying to say? In Florida and like Texas, a big percent of the population is immigrants or non-citizens. So they should have some kind of say, and I do agree with like everyone else on what happens in their daily lives because it is affecting them and it's also affecting their kids. So because I said I saw the school board, so I don't see no problem with it. Like, if you live in a place, you should get a say in what happens.
Okay. I'm probably the contrarian
Yeah.
against, I'm probably the contrarian of the group. Um, it depends. Well, not it depends. I would probably be completely against it, and here's why, because there's a path to citizenship. And if you take the path to citizenship, one of the benefits that you get as a citizen is to be able to make decisions about the country via voting. I would think you would have to get into too many if then else scenarios to say, well, this portion of a non-citizen can vote, but not this portion. I.e., what if somebody gets on a plane and is here for 2 weeks? Do they have the ability to cast a vote? If they've been here for 6 months, do they have the ability to pass a vote? If they've been here for a year, do they plan to stay forever or maybe leave? I think it'd be too many if then else's. And that's what we're talking about is the if then else's with every other group. And while I completely agree, Yana, that it's been marginalized groups, we were talking about citizens. So these are people that should have, via their citizenship, had the right, but it was purposefully manipulated so that they couldn't exercise it. Yeah, I'm the contrarian. I would think that if you're not a citizen, but you want to participate in this process, then you take the path to citizenship, become a citizen, and then one of the rights that you get as a citizen is to be able to vote.
Yeah, no, actually, I like completely see your point, and I think you really did make a good point with like what, how would you decide what non-citizens do get it? Because like as a there's obviously visas and stuff, but as a like if you have just soil, like you born in the soil, you're an American citizen, so like you get voting rights, and if you have a visa, etc., you get voting rights. So I do agree, like there would have to be something in place because you couldn't just be like, oh, I guess it would have to be with like there's things they couldn't put into place. Like I know, and like you have to have a license, but then you need citizenship to do that too. You would have to have a permanent address and stuff like that. But I do see your point, and it did make me like change my opinion a little because I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Like it is a process, and it would I think cause more problems.
Or I could be completely wrong. I could be one of the people that in any of the units was saying no, and for this reason. Women, no, they're not intelligent enough. And if they want to participate in the process, they'll rely on their husbands, right? So in every group, in every unit, we've seen a group of people that take a stance against. And unfortunately on this one, I'm the one that is not vehemently against, but sees challenges with. And that's federal or even locally. Even locally.
Yeah, I do think it should be a hard stop at like federal, but like I don't think you should have that, but I think we have to work out the kinks for local.
100%, because there is the question of taxes, right? Like, are people actually paying taxes, but then they don't get to participate in democracy? That would be counter to my argument for DC statehood. So it's complicated, I think is what I'm trying to say. On its face, I disagree with it, but I could see how it would be counter to my DC argument.
Okay, now you have me in a bind because now I'm trying to look at for both. Okay, I'm looking at it from both point of views now for support and then like opposing for non-citizens.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to elaborate on both. So I know for some supporters they may argue like especially legal permanent residence, right? And that goes into like the visas you guys were just talking about, what should be considered, what things should be considered in order to gain that right to vote, right? So once the legal permanent residents they gain that, they contribute to their communities through things such as what like work, taxes, and even as far as like civic engagement, right? But they yet lack a political voice and decisions to affect their daily lives. So I understand it from that point. I'm a person, they're people, right? They even might point to like past struggles for voting rights, such as the fight for African American suffrage, or women's suffrage, right? Where exclusion from voting was used to deny full participation within society in general. So advocates might even argue to the point where just as those groups were once wrongly excluded, non-citizens should be granted that local governance. Some people may argue that, but now that you made me think about opposing non-citizens, I think it's kind of emphasized that voting is fundamentally tied right to citizenship. So I guess I'll make the argument such as, like, let's say the civil rights movement, which fought for equal rights for citizens, keyword being citizens, right? Not to extend it to non-citizens. So some may claim that voting rights should be an incentive, matter of fact, for immigrants to complete their naturalization process. But that debate is it's I feel like exclusion and inclusion in regards to that, but I feel like it will have to be a process for that. But it's so many pros and cons for both sides.
Javon, did you get an opportunity to weigh in? I can't remember. I'm sorry. About citizens and non-citizens having the ability to vote.
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'll say, Shauna, I think you're demonstrating, I think, what her rationale may be for setting the class up this way is to get us to not only just learn about the past, but start to really think through some of our views and some of just people's views. How did they get there? How did they get to yes? How did they get to no? Do you agree with it? So it's the same kind of thing on the next question. What do you think about lowering the voting age? So we saw that we already had an attempt, the youth suffrage, right, if you will, where they wanted to drop the voting age from 21 to 18. People said absolutely not. They're 18. They're not smart enough to do that yet. But then groups shot back and said, well, like post-Vietnam War, hey, well, if we're old enough to go to war, we should be old enough to vote. So that was their rationale for lowering the voting age. And through some challenges and some deviations in their group structure, we finally saw that an amendment that they got the ability to 18-year-olds being the ability to vote. Do you guys now think we should drop the voting age from 18 to 16?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we got a yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why? Tell us
Yes.
why.
I believe that you should get like the youth of a voice, the opinion.
Okay.
Like some states, not to get off topic, but like some states, like here in Virginia, you got a working permit start at 16. Why not give them a voting permit? I think we saw I was in high school, maybe about 2014, I think 2014, we had like school counselors help us register to vote at 17. I think it was 17, 18. I wasn't sure. Maybe my senior year, maybe.
Yep.
But just give them a chance, give them opportunities. We got working permits in different states at a younger age, 15, 16, 17. The youth is the future. Why not? This can be really give like a boost in voting as well. Give them opportunity to learn like local leaders, like how like political system, the voting system goes. Put them out there, give them a chance.
I
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
um I have to politely disagree. I don't know. I the first so my birthday's in December. So the year I turned 18, obviously I couldn't vote that year. So I had to wait till the next election, which was the current one. And I don't think it should be lowered. I don't think that age group is very well knowledge. They make some irrational choices. Like, and I'm just saying from being, I'm like, oh, right. I mean, I know who I would have voted for at 18 because it sure as hell would have been Trump, and it's sure as heck would be him now. But I, I think it takes that like I don't know. I think going to college and being in a different space than what you know and being away from like your parents and your parents' opinion and having to like be able to force and change your own opinion, I have seen it has changed a lot of people and it has changed the way they vote. So because I grew up in a very like red state. Not I grew up in Maryland, but I grew up in a very red part of the state. So a lot of people would just be like, "Oh, well, my family votes this way, so I do vote this way too." And it took some of those people leaving and then like educating themselves to be like, "Oh, that wasn't that wasn't the way of thinking." So basically what I'm trying to say, rant aside, is like I think when you're that age, you're still heavily influenced by the opinions of your family and who you and like who's around you. So I think it takes like that the maturing and growing just a little bit to be like to then, you know, make your own opinion and vote informative, if that makes sense.
For hearing a similar argument in any of the units against a group of people tonight? No, I want to say there was a similar argument in the women's suffrage movement where people were saying if we give women the right to vote, it's really just giving a man kind of two votes because they're just going to vote the same way as their husbands. I could be making that up, but I think I remember that.
Yeah.
And that's true. Very true.
Hey, Yana, you were gonna say something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that like I'm honestly torn like with these two arguments because if I remember correctly, there was also like a narrative to like up the voting age to like 25. I think Vivek Ramaswamy was saying something about how like young people lack the life experience or the civic knowledge to like know how to vote. And he's referencing young people as like 18-year-olds, like the normal voting age, right? So like, but then I thought about it and I was like, well, if we were to lower the voting age, like I was 16 during 2020. And I think what I remember a lot about that time is that most of my peers, although they were like, like it's the first time I ever saw like activism coming from like such a young group of people, especially during like the whole like Black Lives Matter protests and that movement going on. However, I did notice that a lot of the people like around me and a lot of my peers, and me included sometimes, like we got most of our information like from like the internet. Like they weren't actually like reading up on anything like on themselves. It was mostly like whatever narrative was being pushed by like social media or like their families was like their stance that they had on the matter. But then if you also think so, like I guess like what Dina said about like, oh, like they're like the opinions coming from their parents. So I could kind of like see that point where it's like, yeah, like that also makes sense because like I was 16 once. And although like I like would like to believe that I did enough research to know like at least somewhat where I aligned, I can understand how a lot of people like at that age just kind of rely on like the mo most opinions of like their parents plus like something that may not be the most reliable. However, I also was like, when I was 15 years old, I was already working like with a work permit. So then I was like, okay, there's a lot of 16-year-olds that are working, paying taxes, and like even in some states, like tried as adults. Like when they're on trial, like they're tried as adults. So it's like they're also driving, like they're given so many like I want to say like liberties and freedoms where it's like, why not? Like, what is stopping them? Like, if you're letting a 16-year-old get behind the wheel and like put their life on the line and drive, but like not vote, it's like, how do you determine what they're like cognizant enough for and what they're not? Right? Because like, I want to say like I'm for lowering the voting age, but then because of like how like, I guess like, again, just like based on where the political opinions can form from, I feel like if we were to lower the voting age, like you would have to also kind of almost change like the education system in a sense where you're taught more about like elections like early on. Like at least like forming like an opinion early on. And I think that would like affect like a whole system of things. So it might just be really difficult. But I guess like to answer the question, I'm for lowering the voting age. It's just that it's also like, no, I don't really know. But yeah.
I
Okay.
I'm sorry, because I mean, if anyone wants to expand on this, they can. But I just kind of was kind of wanted to pose another question. If 18 to 29 is the most least likely to show up to the voting polls, it is. I don't understand why, because we seem the most like radical in this generation. But they're most likely to show up to the voting polls. Do you think lowering the voting age, because then it would be from like what 16 to 27? Do you think that would make young voters have a bigger impact in elections than we currently have? That's just the question. I think yes, but not the way we want, if that makes sense. Like I think you would see. I think it would be the same way we already see elections, like white people going, or like Southern white people going one way, but it would be, you know what I mean? Like I think it would show the same, but we would have a bigger push. And depending on the candidate, it could change it, but I don't know. You guys can you guys can offer your opinion on that one.
I think I'm gonna piggyback off of something Yana said and then come back to your question. I would 100% be for it for some of the reasons that I stated earlier, right? Citizenship, you brought up Yana, the fact that they can have, and so did you, Javon, you can have a driver's license, you can work and get taxed. So you're a citizen, taxation should equal representation to me. 100% same arguments that were made for the youth movement that got us the 26th Amendment, right? Their main cause was, hey, we can go to war, so we should be able to vote. I'm going to use DC's and say, if you're going to get taxed, you should be able to vote. I think your question on whether or not that'll expand the percentage of people, increase the percentage of turnout at the polls, it who knows? But I don't want to use any of the arguments except for citizenship, right? That's the kind of place that I'm drawing the line. I don't want to use any of the arguments of the past, the ones that said, well, if your grandfather, like the grandfather clause, if your grandfathers didn't vote, you can't vote because XYZ, right? If you are a native, then you really shouldn't get the right to vote because you don't even really live here. It's kind of the way that I'm interpreting that chapter. Um, I don't want to discredit the intelligence of 16-year-olds. And I want to say from the assignment, the unit that we did on representation in Congress, it is overly represented by, if I remember, Gen X, right? We've got a couple of boomers, but mainly Gen X that are making rules and decisions for 16-year-olds that are based on experience that's, how old at this point? 40, 50-year gap between the generations. I think that 16, 17-year-olds should absolutely say, these are the things that are important to me. Stop trying to drag us backwards. And this is my definition of forward.
I'm gonna try to remember everything because you guys are just making so many good points. It's literally a combination of Yana. Is that your Yana? Am I pronouncing it right? Yes. Okay. And Ricky, you talked about earlier about how they have to go through the process to even like drive. I think it needs to be the same when it comes to voting. I'm for like voting, younger people voting, because first of all, times are changing. This is the most informed we've been in decades, and the information we can get is literally like even at our fingertips. I understand like some people who oppose it, they fear young voters might not know who to vote for, might be misinformed, or they're worried about inexperience and emotional decisions, right? Or the claiming that the youth lack sufficient connections to their communities. But like I said, I feel like we're the most connected than we ever been. The youth, we literally live within this society and we recognize like what's going on versus people like boomers, like you just said, how like they have this age gap where they think that we're still in like the 1900s when we're currently in 2025, right? But I'm in favor for lowering it just because I feel like they're educated enough to represent their interests for not only themselves but for other people. They have like a legitimate state in society because they can work, they pay tax, and it would strengthen the democracy as a whole. um I feel like also they need like an outlet for political expression to help with that civic unrest, especially we've seen that even now in today's age where the current election, it has a lot of people very uneasy, even as of right now, with months into this administration. And lastly, since they already contribute to working taxes, and I feel like they're very involved with their community. So piggybacking off that 26th amendment, which helped lower the voting age to 21, I feel like it should be lowered more for federal and state elections. So that's the voter age set. Yes, we know it's for the response for like the Vietnam War, but more for that congressional enforcement for the younger generation. So I'm for it, and hopefully that's something we can get to.
Yeah, you brought up good points. There's real things happening in their lives that are affecting that particular group, like gun rights, right? Where they could impact legislation in the future that is directly impacting them if
Mm-hmm.
they to vote. Okay. What about felons, convicted felons?
I'm gonna say yes, but it depends on the situation. It depends. I know different states have different parole hearings. But it really depends on the situation.
It depends on, so we've read in the unit that that's the crux of usually the issue is trying to define what a felon is and what types of crimes count or don't count.
Like I would say like if it's like a repeated crime. I'm saying like okay, murder, murder, murder. But if it's like maybe like grand theft, robbery, we want like give them like I want to know like because there's a class I'm taking right now called English Social Writing. There's a book we read, Write Your Way Out, and it discussed like how these 12 felons like got into prison and they had to share their story, like what made them where they was. And it gave me okay, cool, some felons came from like abusive homes, um, some was homeless, some was like trying to prove themselves in the neighborhood, like prove their parents, like because it wasn't like but I just said it depends on like it really depends on the crime for me, you know, like I want to get a chance to know like their background. I want to like the hearing and stuff like that. So it really depends on the states. It depends on the parole hearing. It depends on a lot of key factors. But I'm definitely for it. But it really depends on the situation.
Do you think a law could be written with enough descriptions or determiners such that the federal government or state agencies could interpret that the way that you're describing?
I'm not sure. It's
Yeah.
not sure. It's really
Okay.
yeah, it's really debatable. It's gonna be hard though.
Okay. Okay.
I think.
Anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that
Oh,
enough?
go ahead.
I think that, you're saying is like misdemeanors, like theft, like small stuff, like traffic violations, like stuff like that. I do think like murder are like more serious cases. Number one, I don't think you're getting out of jail if you did more serious stuff, and I don't think you should have the right to vote if you don't even get to. But that's a whole other thing. So I do think it should be like smaller misdemeanors, and I can't remember the exact story, but I remember if you're if you're convicted of a crime, you serve your time, and it's cleared off your record, then I do think you should have the right to vote. I can't remember the exact story, but I do remember that guy we learned about, and I believe it was in the last unit or two, where it was like 30 years later, and he went to register to vote, and they're like, "You can't vote." I do think that's a little
Too hard.
ridiculous. I think if you done the time, and it was like something so small he had did. So I think if you had done it and served the time, and like a good amount of time, and it's like not even on your record anymore, then you should have the right to vote. But if it's like murder, and even if you served your time and it's still on your record, then I do not agree you should vote. And when you Ricky, when you said like how would they write that out, I don't really know. It would have to be lengthy. It would have to be very descriptive, because as you've seen, if it's not lengthy and descriptive, we tend to we tend to interpret it in the way we want. So it would have to be very descriptive. That's all I got.
Yeah, they
Uh,
also got to have like a good supporting cast, like to make it work, to like actually like really advocate for this person, like why they deserve a chance to vote, whether they are felon. And that it really depends. Like it gotta be like somebody like a representative of the state or somebody to like really like, okay, he got somebody like, he deserved a chance. We heard the input, stuff like that. Then it's like, but it really depends on the crime though. It just like if you murdered, they're gonna let you took a person life, a voter, or something like that. But it really depends on like the crime, again, parole hearing in different states, because it's gonna be kind of harsh. I mean, they sometimes I think felons get like a bad rep depending on the situation, without even like not hearing their whole story, their background of who like where they come from, like what made them, led to prison. But I'm definitely down for it. But it just seems it's very debatable.
Yeah, just to chime in here,
Go ahead.
believe that like not letting people that were felons vote, it honestly like undermines like rehabilitation, right? Like think about it this way, if you're allowed to get like a lower sentence based on something that you did by going to like, like by showing good behavior, like going to correctional facilities, stuff
Yeah.
like that, like if you're allowed to get a lower sentencing, which honestly shows improvement, I feel like it should be within good argument and with good reason that if you maintain such good behavior or like said behavior and influence that you should be able to regain that right back, right? Like if you've served your time and you're not on probation and like it's been like an extended period of time, like based on what you said, like what laws could be in place or like what should we do to like ratify that. I think that the second that like if you're let out of jail simply because like it's been shown by people's like that have been observing you that you've been doing well, like like there's obvious change there, this like when you're off probation, I think that's like a better time to like regain the right back, because I just don't think it's fair to be like, oh, because of this one thing that happened, obviously like there's the exceptions of like murder and stuff, but then again, like if it was, I just don't think they'd be out of jail. Like I don't think they would ever leave if it was to the point where like, oh, like this is like a bad person, what they did was wrong. Because there are so many cases in which like, for instance, like I know this is like just because I'm like a true crime person, but like people argue like the Mendez brothers, like the twins, like people that do kill or do commit crime, they have like some sort of like justification maybe, or like based on their background. Like it honestly takes away the votes from people that can honestly do things to like enact changes and to prevent it from happening to other people. Like they have such a voice where it's like because they've done the crime and they know what it's like to be like on the inside and like what it means to be like criminalized for this. Once they leave prison, they have the opportunity to like use their voice to like advocate against it. But then to say that, oh, because they did this one thing, they can't like ever have a say like in our government is kind of a little, it's not like weird to me. But yeah.
I would like to add one more thing. Like I'm not sure y'all familiar, but there was like a Nikki a Netflix series like on the brothers. I forgot the brother's name.
What, the Mendez brothers that she just
Yes,
mentioned?
yes, 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 yes. So I was like, I mean, that's a pretty. I mean, that's going out. I mean, it's going on now. Like trying to figure out like, what if? Okay, we heard the story. Um, it made nationwide news, different outlets, and they trying to figure out. They deserve, probation. They deserve to get out.
Yvonne, I'm gonna pull the conversation just back in just a little bit because we've got 16 minutes
Oh,
left.
I'm sorry, sorry, sorry.
I think what I'm hearing from you guys is you're in favor. There's trouble with the definition or the if then else's. That's what we learned in that unit. We learned that the term other crimes is where everybody was tripping up and it was being interpreted differently, right? Javon, you're saying for this, yes, and Danae, for this, yes, for this, no, for this, yes, for this, no. And yeah, and it sounds like you're saying kind of the same thing, right? Like this set, maybe that's it, maybe not, maybe somebody can vouch for them, or we could go back and look at their character. The trouble is when we're talking about rights, we're talking about legislation. that is performed at, the local, county level, the state level, or ultimately the Supreme Court. So we wind up going to the Constitution. And the challenge with that is you start to interpret other crimes. What is that? Character kind of is taken out of it, and context becomes more of the kind of crux of the solution or crux of the problem. What type of crime? When do we take it on its face the way that it's written, or do we take the law all the way back to when it was written and what was, this type of crime at the time? So I think you guys are all saying that you're in favor. The challenge is how to define that in an amendment such that you kind of grant certain people, certain felons or certain type of felonies, the ability to regain their right to vote. Did I sum that up properly?
Yeah.
Because the argument that we also saw that felons were making was, this is against my 14th Amendment right. I have due process. I'm a citizen. I'm allowed to vote. I have due process. You can't take this away from me. Anna, did you get a chance to chime in there?
No, I was just letting y'all, do it. But I wanted to come at it from a different perspective. We're seeing that, yes, we would, but my question is, how would we go amongst that process to even allow that? So I wanted to come from that point of view, right? So within the readings, when they're describing making amendments, there's always a process, and they describe them within sections, right? So if I was to make this law, right, what would I do in order to allow people who've been convicted to give them that right back to vote? So how could we do it? Can do like, okay, we can do it in 3 sections. So section 1 could be the United States, felons and citizens of the United States, because knowing that they're citizens, number one, even though they were incarcerated, this is also important. They should not be denied by any United States or any state the account of criminal like conviction, except during a period of incarceration or like a felony like offense. So that will go along with the big crimes and like smaller crimes such as like misdemeanors and things of that nature. Because I remember you mentioning about what do we do about the small crimes versus the big crimes, right? And then we can move into like a different section, like upon like incarceration, the right to vote shall be automatically restored without any additional action, but it should be dependent on like the time frame. So for example, if this person was sentenced to this many years, how many years after they get out are they allowed back their voting rights instead of just stripping them completely? I know someone mentioned about someone being out for like 30 years and he still wasn't able to vote, right? And it can even go as far as to like probation, parole, of any other form of like supervised release. Why shouldn't they, be allowed their voting rights back if they still have that once they get released? And I guess we can do like section 3, because I've really been thinking about this since you guys have been talking. So section 3, it should be like Congress shall have the power to enforce this article, but only in the appropriate legislation, because that is all it's about. So it needs to be an amendment that ensures only current incarceration individuals will lose those voting rights instead of having them losing them for like basically the rest of their lives. But once released, those rights are restored automatically. But this way, it can literally eliminate any bureaucratic obstacles, because at the end of the day, we're aiming for a democracy. So it is also Congress' job, given that power, to prevent the states from imposing any additional restrictions in regards to that. I understand different states have different laws when it comes to this, but in order for that to happen, I feel as though these could be the steps and procedures we need to take in order to enforce that.
Okay. So you would take, am I hearing you correctly if I summarize and say you would take the amendments that that were proposed in the last chapter and you add into that, his plan was for everybody, one citizen, kind of one vote, everybody. You would change in there that you just lose that right when you are incarcerated, and that when you're released, it's automatically re-granted.
Yes, exactly. In order to make something new, taking from the old, and then restoring that, but just having different procedures in regards to it. So at the end of the day, they're still civilians, they're still citizen, and they're still human. I wouldn't want to treat anyone different due to like the time that they did. But it's 10:50, so we can move on to the next question.
Now your guys are good. We can stay wherever we want to. So we've got money in politics or gerrymandering. You guys want to go Rucho versus common cause?
Interrupt you, but did we do the constitutional amendment affirming the right to vote one?
Where's that?
Yeah, I think we skipped that one, the one that was before the felony.
I do think we get to
Oh, I
pick.
see.
I
Which
think
one?
we get to pick though. It's
I don't
just
think
depending
I
on
think it doesn't
time.
matter. Yeah, it's up to y'all.
Sorry.
I mean, do you want to do the Congress one just because it kind of has been what we've been talking about the whole time?
Sure. Go for it.
Oh, I'll start. What is the question again? Yeah, I think a constant movement for the right to vote is needed. I think it's clearly been shown. There was literally an entire unit where it was like why we need it, and the language, once again, the language of amendments, it would have to be very specific. It would have to be like the voting, it is a guarantee to all American citizens, regardless of race, gender, etc., etc. But yeah, you guys can chime in.
Just to chime in real quick. I honestly would strongly support a constitutional amendment affirming the right to vote, as it would honestly provide like a stronger legal protection against voter suppression and restrictive election laws. Currently, like voting rights are not explicitly guaranteed in the Constitution, and like to reference the Shelby County versus Holder again, decisions like that have shown how vulnerable they can be to like judicial rollbacks. So I'm definitely for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback off of that. Mainly this is gonna be coming from Unit 1, especially with the Shelby and holding procedures. And I feel like the biggest obstacles when even passing such an amendment will be that political like gridlock they will face, right? So like things like modern like filibustering rules, which would allow blocking of voting rights legislation without an actual debate, right? And then getting the requirements, getting the requirements supermajority would be extremely difficult when it comes to that. I think I'm also going in the direction of the state. I'm gonna do when it comes to like the states. So states historically restrict federal control over voting rights. So that's the achieving that ratification from 3/4 of the states would face a big challenge when it comes to that constitutional amendment affirming for the right to vote. And I'll just make the last point just for time's sakes. The implication challenges that will come to that of creating like an effective enforcement would be very crucial. And then the states might have to attempt different procedures and protections through that, once again, that race neutral policies that we will have to face when coming to making that decision for that. I'm gonna just keep it short and there for everyone else to speak.
So there were kind of two versions of amendment put forward. It sounds like you're more in line. Your thinking is more in line with the second one. You said something about representation, and I believe it was the second version where they also propose that you kind of rebalance the representation in the House and the Senate so that everybody gets to know more of this. I'm sorry, it's based on, I want to say it was population. Is that right or wrong? Do you guys remember? In the Second Amendment, the author proposed a different calculus for representation.
Was it for was it like
population?
Senate? Are you talking about in the Senate when they're talking about representation?
I think it was the Senate. Yeah, I think it was
to make it basically like the House of Representatives, where it would be based on
there it is.
Population.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for getting me there.
You're welcome.
Yvonne, do you have any thoughts there? No, you're good. Okay.
I did a point that Shanna brought up that I was like, oh, that's a good point, was state governments have the chance to like interpret the law the way they want. So that's why I made the point that it has to be very specific language. I do believe that we would be seeing an increase in Supreme Court cases, if there was one, because states will try to work around it because voter suppression is a thing, which comes back to the other question we had. But yeah, it was a good point. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, don't disagree. And I think that's the point that was made in the last unit by the author. Like, we've got all these amendments and we keep thinking, right, we've got it. This time we've got it, guys. And his point was we need very explicit language that says all and then defines what all means and then puts the proper representation in Congress such that it could really, you're not drowning out a certain set of voices or any sets of voices for that matter, right? We have 4 minutes left. You guys want to jump into money and politics? I think it was you, Yana, that brought up these super PACs. Did I misattribute that to you? Maybe. It may not have been. I know somebody brought up
I don't think it was
super
me,
PACs
but
earlier.
we can jump into that. I would just need like 2 seconds to like think about what I want to say. But if
Yeah, no,
anyone
or anything else. We don't have to answer that one. We could literally ask any question that we want to.
I mean, okay. I think I know what I'm saying. I believe, like, based on the question, I believe that money in politics is like somewhat like more of like a uniquely negative force because it honestly like undermines the democratic equality by giving disproportionate influence to wealthy individuals and corporations. Like an example of this again would be in like the Citizens United versus FEC, which allowed unlimited corporate and union spending in elections, which has honestly led to an era where like political power is heavily skewed towards the richest donors. So I personally don't think that money in politics is like completely the best. I understand why some people might argue that like it's a form of free speech, but I feel like that can get really drowned out when like you're pouring in so much money into like an election per se or like anything like that. So that's where I stand on that.
Love it. Anybody else? Agree, disagree?
I totally agree that it is a very negative force within our democracy. Um, Even in today's, I'm pretty sure it was mentioned within Unit 6 when they talk about like dark money, and especially when they donate over a certain amount, they don't even have to disclose who the donor is, right? So I don't think it's like a positive thing at all. The Supreme Court decisions for the citizens of like the United States has like contributed like such a skewed representation of our political system. Honestly, it doesn't really show it to me. It doesn't really show that we're for the people. It just shows if you have the most money and you fund me the most, that's the direction we're going to go. But for like some of the rulings within Unit 6, along with their court decision, has made like it nearly impossible that the it's like an overwhelming amount of like money being spent on campaigns. So these decisions have created a system where politics can craft rules and help them stay within power, building that oligarchy that we see today while failing to protect us voters' rights, right? So the court rules have actively undermined the voting rights and fair representation for us citizens. So with the campaign finances describes being a big part of a broader pattern that us people who live in like a regular society, they don't endorse democratic principles for that equal representation that we're fighting for. And I'm gonna end on that note.
What do you guys think about the argument that was put forth by the Supreme Court that since these super PACs, these PACs or super PACs are not directly giving money to the candidate, that they don't have any undue influence? Do you guys think that holds true or no? I'll say I don't think that it does for a reason that you just brought up, Shanna. It's if I know that you could at any point fund my candidate, then I'm more apt to do what's in line with your thinking, whoever's funding. Yeah. Okay. We made it to 10:59.
It was only 5 of us. Great job, everyone.
Yeah.
Really
Anybody
good.
have any last minute things they want to talk about before this recording automatically turns off?
I think we're good.
I think we did it.
Thank you guys so much. You guys did great.
Nice meeting y'all. Hope we can do it again.
Hey, enjoy your weekend now. Enjoy your Saturday, guys.
Enjoy it. Bye, guys.
All right, bye-bye.